Welcome to the Adventurous Minds podcast, examining fitness and wellness through the lens of outdoor sport and adventure.
Hey everyone, welcome back to season 2 of Adventurous Minds. We've got a full season of incredible guests that we can't wait to share with you over the next couple months. First up in season 2, we've got professional big wave surfer Paige Alms. Paige is a legend in the big wave community with a world title and a handful of XXL awards under her belt. Most recently, she made history as being a part of the first group of women to compete in one of surfing's most prestigious competitions, the Aikau Invitational. We sat down to learn how she became one of the best surfers from her formative years on Maui to competing on the biggest stage at the Eddy. Paige talks us through training for big waves, overcoming fear, finding confidence in uncomfortable situations, and much more in episode 1, starting now. Paige, I'm stoked we finally made this happen. It's great to see you again. Of course. And I'm actually pretty excited that we kind of got delayed on recording this because you got invited to the Eddy, so we get to talk about that, which I'm personally very excited to hear about, and I know everyone's also going to listen to. So the timing actually worked out pretty well. Cool. So I just want to go back and start off, like, where did you grow up? When did you first get introduced to surfing?
I was originally born in Victoria, BC, Canada. And I grew up there till I was about 7. And then my mom had always had a dream to travel around Australia. So we sold the house that I had grown up in and packed everything up in storage and went to Australia for almost a year. We traveled around the entire country for 10 months, just my mom and I. Australia is like really welcoming to camping. Like almost every single town has a campground, so they really encourage people to travel their country, which is really rad, and it's pretty safe. And we started in Sydney and did the whole East Coast and back down, did Tasmania, all across the south, over to Perth, up to Darwin, along the west coast, down through the middle, back up to Cairns, and back down to Sydney in 10 months. And that was it was like really formative. That was 8 to 9, and I was out of school for a year and took my first surf lesson in Australia. And when we moved to Maui when I was 9, I'd always been like a really good swimmer and had spent a lot of time in the water and just really loved the ocean. So I started bodyboarding, and like instantly you start standing up on your bodyboard, and one thing leads to another. And I got a surfboard in my hands and basically taught myself how to surf. I mean, I had pointers from friends' parents down at the beach and a little help here and there, but pretty much taught myself how after that first surf lesson in Australia. And I grew up here on Maui since I was 9. Went to high school here, and I live about a 5-minute drive from Aikau school, the elementary school that I went to. And yeah.
That's super cool. Really full circle. So when you went to Australia, was your mom a surfer? Like, what was the pull? She just wanted to explore?
Yeah, my mom wasn't a surfer. She just always kind of had dreams about Australia. I guess I've never really asked her like why Australia in particular, but I know that the country itself, it's amazing. Like I would do the trip that I did as a kid all over again. I really wish that actually one day I could do that. It was a really magical experience. I mean, I was really young, so of course my memories of it are a little different than my mom's, but it was definitely like a life-changing trip and experience to do with her daughter. Like she says, it was just the most incredible thing ever. And as a kid, I remember that being just so amazing, like every campground, there were new people every day, and having to talk to adults and making friends with people and staying on top of schoolwork, but it wasn't necessarily like a strict regimen or homeschooling or whatever. It was like I was pretty good and doing really well in school when my mom pulled me out. So, we were reading and doing math, and that's kind of about it. And when I rolled into school here on Maui, I was right back into it. So I hadn't really skipped a beat, and yeah, pretty magical trip.
It's such a fun age to do a trip like that because you're so impressionable and you're not super young. You're kind of like in that in between where a trip like that can mean a lot to you, and you can even remember it as well. I mean, I think about certain trips with my own family, and it's like I was just too young to really remember it or experience it the right way. So that's awesome. So you get back to Maui, and then you start getting into surfing. Sorry, you said you're 9 years old?
Yeah. So growing up here on Maui, it's funny now, like 9 is like almost old.
Yeah.
Like at, when I was learning, that was kind of, 8, 9, 10 was kind of, the age that kids felt pretty comfortable in the ocean. Now they're on boards when they're 2, and kids are surfing on their own boards when they're like 4 or 5. And it's just so wild to see the transition. Same in the mountains, right? Like skiing, snowboarding, everything's like started so much younger. So it's really cool to see. But yeah, I started surfing when I was 9, and I was down at Hokipa every single day. That's still my home break. It's a wave here on the North Shore of Maui that breaks, I don't know, 350 days a year. It's probably one of the most consistent waves ever. I mean, in the summertime, don't get me wrong, it's waist high, but you can still grab a longboard and get in the water, which is really, really special. And yeah, just kind of grew up surfing here, and you're surrounded by water people of all different sports. I mean, so many sports have started here and progressed here, and Hokipa is actually known pretty much for windsurfing. It was really famous in the 80s and 90s here, and kite surfing. A lot of sports have developed here on Maui, and you're surrounded by all these water people and big wave surfers. And I mean, Jaws is, if you could do a straight shot from my house, 5 minutes down the road. And growing up here, you saw all these big wave surfers, in particular, like the Strapped crew, Laird, Dave, Buzzy, all of that crew were just walking around heroes, and it was kind of seen when I was little as something that was just this wild, incredible, like almost unattainable. It wasn't something that, oh, I can't wait to grow up and do that one day. It was just, you'd look at these guys and a few women that did it, and you're like, this is just amazing. But I grew up wanting to be a competitive surfer. Like I did all of the contests here on Maui. I traveled in Hawaii doing all of the NSSA events, and then over to California for the US championships and nationals every year. And so my dreams and goals were, kind of guided around the contest scene, and I wanted to be a world champ. And it's funny, flash forward here, and to be a big wave world champion is kind of a completely different path. But it kind of just fell into my lap really naturally. It was, we have big waves here on Maui in the wintertime very consistently. A head high day here in the winter is small. So you're kind of around big waves a lot, and it's a pretty natural progression if you want to push yourself. You go from Hokipa, and the biggest days when it's closing out, you could, I mean, a lot of people ride bigger boards, but the biggest board I ride is like a 6'4" out there. And then when you go to over to Honolulu Bay, and big days out there and riding a little bigger boards, and then going to the outer reefs, you're on 7.6s, 8.0s, 9.0s, and then Jaws is like a whole nother beast. But it was a pretty natural progression. I felt like it was just something that I was always drawn to, and I felt really comfortable in big waves. So that's kind of how my path changed when I was about 15. I started surfing bigger waves and just really fell in love with it.
So did you, going backwards a tiny bit, you were on the QS, the really competitive side. What did you think of that experience? Like, was that kind of what set you up to want to compete in big waves, or like, how does that compare?
Oh, I mean, it's completely different. I feel like it's a different sport. The QS was, like I said, that was my dream to get onto the WCT at the time. Like I grew up watching all of the contests and, admired the women here and around the world. Like we had the Honolulu Bay contest was always the last event of the WCT here on Maui. So as a kid growing up and getting to go over and watch and then also compete in it, I was in the trials, I don't know, for 7 years or something as a kid. And to actually physically see these women that like I'd seen in magazines and in surf movies and just admired to be, and then to actually get to meet them and talk to them was like such a cool thing as a kid. Like on Oahu, you're surrounded by pro surfers on the North Shore everywhere. So it's not necessarily like this like wow moment all the time, but to have like the world title come down to the one event that's at like our wave on Maui, it was such a cool experience. And to get to meet all the, you know, all of the tour competitors, and Lane Beachley was winning world title after world title there. And so I got to know her, and I'd always done Rochelle Ballard's camps on Kauai, and she became a good friend. And Keala Kennelly was always like my hero. Like I wanted to charge like KK. Like Rochelle and Keala changed the way that I saw women surfing, because they were getting barreled, and that was like, they charged, and that's what I really loved. I was like, they're the coolest because they can actually get barreled. And it's funny now, like both of those, all three of those women are really good friends of mine. And it's just funny how, like, you know, you flash forward 20 years and you're all friends. And that was definitely like the dream, was to get onto that tour. And so you have to start with the WQS. And at the time it was like right when I was about 18, I didn't have like a main sponsor helping fund all of that travel. So I really had to pick and choose events that I was going to. I was working multiple jobs just to kind of sustain this like surf dream that I wanted to do. And traveling is really expensive, and to travel halfway around the world to, you know, make 1 or 2 heats and then lose, it was just like so hard. And I mean, competing is hard in general, but if you're only doing like a handful of them, and you tend to like, maybe they're all in waist high or smaller surf, and you don't really get to do the whole year, it can be really frustrating. And it really like, really quickly I was like, I don't know if this is really what I wanted to do, especially because the WCT changed so much right around that time. They took off multiple events that I'd always dreamed about, you know, being on the Dream Tour, and they took Tahiti off, they took Fiji off, and the tour completely changed. And so then I was kind of asking myself, like, why am I doing these QS events? Why am I spending all the money that I have to go chase waist high waves and compete in these events that don't necessarily get to show my surfing? And I still to this day feel like my surfing was there, but I didn't have as much experience surfing beach breaks that most of the competitors do. Like on Maui, we have like 2 beach breaks and they're on opposite sides of the island and not anywhere near where I live. So I grew up surfing on reefs that have a lot more power and push behind them. And so it took spending time at beach breaks to really like learn how to surf them and how to generate speed with no push. And so it was just like a completely different, you know, time. And I realized very quickly that it wasn't something that I was that passionate about. It was making me feel shitty. Like I was just kind of down on it. And I was bummed that I never got to showcase my surfing at these events. And so I kind of like slowly, like I still did a few events here and there, but I slowly was retracting from the competition, and not really necessarily with a plan, but just knowing that I didn't really love doing that anymore. Like the competitive drive kind of disappeared. And right around that same time, people started paddle surfing at Jaws. And I had tow surfed out there a handful of times, and maybe I never really fully engulfed myself in the tow surfing thing, because it really only happens a couple times a year. But soon as people started paddle surfing it, like the Mad Dog crew, Marcio, Yuri, and Danilo really like, you know, they went out there and showed everybody that it was possible, but they were mostly doing it on the left. And then a few years later, a handful of guys started doing it on the right. And once like the doors kind of opened that it was possible, a lot of people, not a lot, but a handful of surfers here on Maui really like got after it and were trying to push the level. And it was still right when tow surfing was like, I mean, the surfers were amongst the tow surfers, and it became very clear very quickly that that doesn't mix. But yeah, when my friends, like a lot of my peers and, you know, buddies that I grew up surfing here with started doing that, I actually told a friend this story the other day, that it literally was just my friends going out and doing it and me looking at them and being like, if they can do it, I can do it. I don't want to miss out. And that's basically how I started surfing out of Jaws. It was like the fear of missing out and seeing my friends do it. And once I knew that it was possible, I was like, okay, let's try. And one thing led to another. Here we are.
I think there's a lot of origin stories like that, where it's like just the fear of missing out. You're like, all right, I think I can do that. I want to do it. I don't want to miss out on that.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I've had a handful of those experiences in my life. And so what was it like the first time you went out at Jaws? I mean, was that the first real big wave you went out to?
No, it wasn't the first. So I was taken out when I was about 15 by my mentor shaper at the time, Chris Vandervoort, who was an incredible surfer, and he took me out to an outer reef here. And that was kind of like when the first time I ever rode, and I think I was on a 9.0 or a 9.2. And that was the first time that I'd ever been out to like actual like big waves, besides tow surfing, because tow surfing is just a completely different sport. You can't even compare them.
Yeah.
You know, you're using a motorized vehicle to catch waves versus your own two arms and your skills and all of that. So that was my first time, but Jaws is like a completely different place. It's a completely different place from almost every big wave around the world. Like I've never been anywhere where I compare that wave to. I've been to a lot of amazing big waves, but Jaws it's the best. So going out there for the first time was such a wild experience. And it was kind of funny because I'd been invited to an event in Oregon at Nelscott Reef. And so Sean made me a 9.6, and I had it under my arm as this purple beast. It was so cool. And then when everyone started paddling out at Jaws, he made me a 10.2, a lime green 10.2. And I remember picking that board up and being like, I don't know if I ever want to ride this. Like the waves that you used to catch on a board that big, I was terrified. And it's funny because that board is actually so much thinner and smaller than like kind of what we're riding now for that size, at least for a 10.2. And yeah, like I said, a handful of my friends had been out there paddle surfing. Albie, Matt, Marlon, just a handful of like the guys that I surfed with at Hokipa all the time. And that day, I remember Matt and Albie both rode for Sean at the time, and Matt texted Sean, I think, and was like, "It's firing, get down here. It's like 18 feet and glassy." And so we like rushed down to Jaws. And like, you know, no thoughts of what ifs or safety plan. Like that was so like nobody ever even thought of that stuff. And we got down and we hiked down the cliff, and Sean and I both paddled out on big boards and jumped off the rocks, which was like a whole experience in itself. And that session made me not want to do that ever again. It was a beautiful day. It was like I'd say a 15 to 18 foot, and then there were a couple 20-foot waves that day, and it was just glassy. And it was, you know, the trades, like light trades came up middle of the day that kind of made us all go in, but I caught 3 waves that day, and it was a life-changing experience. And in the sense of, this is what I want to do, and I love this more than anything. And also like the way that we're going to do it, because that session, I broke my leash. I was swimming in the middle of the lineup. No thoughts of what would happen if just your leash broke. There were no jet skis there until about 5 minutes before I broke my leash. Right before I broke my leash, Albie broke his board. So he's swimming on the inside with a broken board. I'm swimming in the lineup with no board. And Yuri had just shown up with his tow partner. Actually, not his tow partner. They showed up both with paddle boards, I believe. And so it was like within 5 minutes, we were like, oh, thank God there's a jet ski here. Like, we hadn't even thought of what would happen. You're just like kids. But I mean, there were plenty of people out there. There were 20 surfers out that no one else thought of a safety plan. And so they took us into the rocks. We went and found our boards. Albie found part of his board. I found my board. And this huge set was coming while we were standing on the rocks and looking out. And I remember just looking out and seeing Yuri airdrop on this one and just eat it. And turns out his board hit him in the face and broke his jaw. And so all of this happened within about 20 minutes. We got back out, jumped off the rocks, we're fine, and all of that happened in 20 minutes with one jet ski in the water. And so that was an eye-opening experience. Sean and I got a new used jet ski shortly after that, and I think I've only jumped off the rocks twice since then. But that session changed everybody's perspective. Like, you couldn't do it like that anymore. And this was all pre-inflation vest, pre-impact vest. Like, right. Nobody had anything on.
It's a totally different game now.
Completely different game, and we take it very seriously now, always. But the safety protocols and the what ifs are just like, you got to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And 99 out of 100 times, everything's fine. Everybody goes home safe, but you got to go out there prepared. And that session was what changed it. Changed a lot.
So I've got two main questions for you here. They're kind of like part of each other. But so, like, first off, what was it about that experience, like the actual surfing, that was like, okay, this is what I want to do, particularly since it sounds like it wasn't like the easiest session, like, stuff went wrong and whatever. Like, so what about the surfing? And then the second part is like, how did that experience then change the way, this is more of a general question, but change the way you trained? Like, how, because I imagine that training for big wave surfing is very different than for the smaller stuff.
Yeah, totally. So the first part, I guess, I mean, it's the moments on a wave that make that wave so special. I mean, these waves that come in out there are what you draw as a kid in your like notepad or your binder. You're like, it's a perfect A-frame that goes left and right, and they break pretty consistently in the same spot. I mean, when you're paddle surfing, it seems very spread out, but from the cliff, you'd say that they break in the same spot. And I mean, I'm a regular foot, so I'm, the right is this hollow barreling slab basically, and the left can give some of the biggest waves in the world, and it's just like a peeling, firing point break almost. So it's the wave and where it is and the location and what you're looking at up, like when you turn in, and what you're looking at is, I mean, it's the most beautiful Maui there is. And you look down the coast, you see the West Maui Mountains. It's just a very magical place that it's really hard to describe unless you get to actually like be there. It's just a really powerful, like energetically powerful place. And the speed at which you go on these waves, especially when you paddle surf into them, like it is such a different experience than, having a driver on a jet ski and you're holding onto a tow rope. You have to perfectly position yourself in the lineup in order to paddle into these waves. And that takes years and years and years of knowledge of reading the ocean and what waves do, and this wave in particular, and add in, wind and tide and current and all of that. It's really hard. And when you catch a wave out there and you successfully kick out in the channel, it's one of the most amazing feelings in the sense of accomplishment. Like, I love riding big waves, and when you kick out of a wave out there, you're like, oh, like, either, oh, I want a bigger one, or I want to do something different, or, oh, that was the best wave of my life. Like, these highs are just incredible. And riding big waves is just so rare. It's not something that, we get a handful of sessions a year. Last year I rode 1.5 waves out at Jaws, and this winter we've had a much better winter. But that being said, I've been out there, 4 or 5 times this season. So it's not something that we get to do very often. So, and in those sessions, if you catch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 waves in a session, it's, those are your most memorable waves of the winter. So yeah, it's the feeling that you get on these waves, and it's, it's the endorphin rush and the high that you get from surfing this wave is just, that's what I hunt and dream for, and can't wait for next season, because it seems like this winter's almost over. But yeah, the second part of that, what changed the training, right? Well, it's funny because I guess when I was like a teenager, I never really did a lot of training. I think I just surfed my brains out, and I was always really active. And when I was like a younger teenager, I played soccer, and I mean, through school, I was doing track and field. And so whether that's training, I mean, it basically is.
For sure. Yeah.
I was really active as a kid. And then it wasn't into my like early 20s. And that was like when I started, surfing out at Jaws and really wanting to like take it to that next level. Cause I think, I felt maybe something was lacking. And the training that goes into big waves, I mean, depends on the time of the season and what you're trying to build on. Like, let's say September, October, I'm trying to get as physically fit as I possibly can. And I'm doing like a winter training block that's like, so just completely focused on getting back in shape from the summer and getting to my peak physical performance and being ready for winter. Versus now I'm like, I feel really good, but it's more of like a sustain. We're not like trying to build to something. So it kind of depends. But when I'm like training for the winter season, it's like full on at least 5 days a week doing stuff to just like get to that tip top shape. And I mean, I guess a few things that are different for big wave surfing is you're doing a lot of like breath hold stuff. And we do, in our winter camp training, we'll go up 10,000 feet to the top of Haleakala and do, high elevation training, which is pretty cool. And getting to experience that. And it's like a team bonding experience to get to do all these workouts together. I mean, not everyone in our camp at the gym is a big wave surfer, but everyone's trying to, better themselves and get to reach their goals. So it's really fun to kind of push each other because everybody's going through different things, but all with like their goals in mind to get there. And you see other people around you really pushing themselves. It makes you want to push yourself that much more. So it's a really nice experience that we have here at our gym. And but yeah, I mean, the breath hold stuff is probably the main one. And of course, like strength training, your cardio training. I mean, to be a surfer, you kind of need to have it all. You want your cardio to be at that level, and you want to be physically fit and strong to be able to handle like any situation, whether it be to paddle that much faster or to, withstand a really bad wipeout. So yeah.
Yeah. I ask because it's like with surfing, it's particularly with big wave surfing, right? Like you've only gone out a handful of times this year. It's like you have to be ready at a moment's notice for when that swell comes in, compared to other sports where it's like, you might be training for a specific day. It's like, I'm running a marathon on this day and I'm going to compete, or I'm going to train for this long. It's like, you don't have that type of consistency. You just have to like be ready when it's time to go.
Yeah.
Which is such a different style of training. It's
so different. And it can be somewhat frustrating in the sense of like, if you have a slow winter or if you're traveling all summer long, like I primarily focus mostly on the winter season here. And then the summer stuff is more of a bonus. And, if I do get to surf big waves during the summer, it's like a strike mission. But yeah, you have to be ready at a moment's notice. So you're like always trying to be, in the best shape possible, eating really well, and I think that's something most big wave surfers now like take very seriously. And it's really cool because it's, we're trying to like take care of ourselves in the absolute best way possible. And it's fun to surround yourself with with like-minded people that are doing the same. And I'm very lucky here on Maui. Like I feel like there's so many things to do here, that there's so many different types of athletes and people that are just being active here, that you're surrounded by like that lifestyle of like wanting to, pursue goals and push yourself and be adventurous and be healthy. And this is the best place in the world to do it.
For sure. It's cool. I feel like Maui has a slightly different like subset of people compared to Oahu, which is just like what you're talking about earlier, just tons of pro surfers. Like you go there and you just see them walking around, and Maui has kind of like I don't know how to describe it. I've never been, but it's from who I know lives there. It's like a slower, like more adventurous type, it seems, something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
So I got to ask about the Eddie. For anyone who doesn't know, can you just describe a little bit about what that event is, why it's important, and then kind of what your experience was like competing?
Yeah, the Eddie is the most prestigious big wave event in the world, and it's done in memory of Eddie Aikau, who was a lifeguard on Oahu, and he passed away trying to save his friend's lives, multiple. And they've had this contest, I believe this year was the 37th year, and it's done every winter season on Oahu at Waimea Bay, and it doesn't happen every year. So it needs to be a certain swell of a certain magnitude that produces these waves at Waimea that are big enough to hold the Eddie. So for example, it hasn't run since 2016, I believe. So 7 years ago. So it's rare. We do get these swells, a handful of times a year. And if we have an El Nino winter, it's a lot, more consistent for these big swells, but it just normally doesn't happen very often. So when it does go off, it's a big deal. It's a huge swell. The Eddie is just like I said, the most prestigious big wave event ever. And to be invited to be an alternate and is one thing. To be invited is a whole nother thing. And then to actually like get to compete in this contest is seriously, that event was definitely one of the most special days of my life. This was the first year that they ever had women a part of the event. I'd been an alternate 4 years ago, I believe, and an invitee the past few years, but this was the first year that they held it. And so it was a monumental day. That swell in particular was like no other. I've never been a part of a big wave swell that was that consistent. There were waves, there were sets every 5 minutes for 12 hours of the day. Like I've never been anywhere in the world. Maybe you have an hour where it pulses, but this was consistent all day long, as big as Waimea gets, closing out across the bay consistently. So that alone made it special. And then to have women in the event was like the first time in 37 years. I think it was a monumental moment for that event, for surfing, for women surfing. It's just like a huge moment in sport. So it was really, really special to be a part of that. There were 34 men and 6 women, and myself included. And it was just an absolutely incredible day. And they had heats of, was it 8? Yeah, it was 5 heats of 8, 7 men and 1 woman in each heat. One heat had 2 women. And it was like just magic. I paddled out, and we had jet ski assist, which was necessary. Helping us get in and out. And once we were out and paddling out in the channel, I was just sitting out there like this was one of the most magical days of my life, and looking around at everybody that I was in the heat with. They all felt the same. And it's basically just a celebration of big wave surfing. And it is a contest, and there are winners, and there's a little bit of prize money. It was kind of it was a lot smaller than years in the past because there was no title sponsor this year. But all in all, it's just a celebration of Eddie's life, and his family put on the event. And it was just an incredible honor to be a part of it. And to just, Luke Shepherdson ended up winning the event. and it was pretty fitting. They say Eddie always picks the winner, and this year he picked an on-duty lifeguard who works at Waimea, and he had almost 3 10s. You're judged on your 3 best waves, and it was just like an absolutely incredible day. He was in both of my heats, so I got to see 2 of his waves, 2 out of the 3. But yeah, just an incredible event. I'm so stoked to be a part of it. I look forward to the next time it runs, and yeah, just a really amazing experience.
That's so cool. I mean, I think I speak for everyone when I say that anyone, like, even if you weren't into surfing, watching it from afar, like online or seeing Instagram clips or whatever it was, I mean, I've never seen that many people like just trying to find a way to see the competition. It seems like there were thousands of people there.
Oh yeah, tens of thousands of people. It was like Woodstock for surfing. It was crazy.
That's what it looked like. I remember because I woke up and I started seeing pictures and I was like, what is going on? Like, this is and the people that were camping out the night before, like,
for 2 days.
Amazing.
2 days.
For 2 days,
they were camping. And then when we left our friend's house at Gas Chambers, which is a few miles down the road from Waimea, people were walking from Pipeline, like miles away at 5 a.m., pitch dark. And when we got down to the bay, there were probably already 10,000 people down there. It was wild. It was so cool. And the bay itself is like, you have not cliffs, but like the shoreline come up on both sides. So it was almost like an amphitheater. And all of that energy was so condensed into one small little bay. It was just like it was crazy. Just so many people there. It really felt like one of the biggest days in surfing ever.
Yeah. I mean, I was watching, I can't remember who the surfer was, but somebody was walking through a crowd of people with his board. And I was like, and the energy that was just kind of like looking at him and I was like, this is such a cool moment. Like, this must, as a surfer, that must feel amazing to be around that many people. I mean, it's not like the big events get lots of spectators, but that just looked different. It was just something else. Walking
down the beach, I mean, they cheered for every single surfer that was going out, and you're walking from one side of the beach all the way to the other side to go down and get in the water. But I will say, when the one woman would walk by, the whole crowd was roaring, because this was a first time ever in the history that women were a part of this event. And I can't even explain like how magical that felt and how supported you felt, like going out to go and charge waves. Like, it was so cool. And, the crowd was what made it feel so special. Like, if people weren't there celebrating surfing like that, it wouldn't have been the same, okay, we'll just go catch some big waves. But that crowd was really special, and I cannot believe how many people were down there, because you can't really see. Like, the first maybe row or two of people you can see, and then up on both sides of the cliff, like along the road, you can see. But I mean, there were tens of thousands of people there that probably couldn't even see the waves. They just wanted to be there and be a part of it. It was magic.
Yeah, it's so cool that this was the first event that women were a part of. I mean, because it's such a massive stage. I mean, the amount of young girls and young women that I feel like would have watched that and been inspired by seeing you guys out there competing against the guys. I mean, I doubt there's been any big wave competition like this ever before, and on that at this scale. So I feel like you would have just inspired like the whole generation, which is so cool to think could come from not just one event, but this one particularly.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, the viewership on this event was one of the biggest ever, and I hope that inspired young kids to go out there and chase their dreams, because that was me living mine. And I never thought in my wildest dreams that women would compete in the Eddy, and let alone to be a part of it. And yeah, anything is possible.
So I kind of want to shift a little bit and talk about, I feel like one thing that a lot of people are curious about when they hear about big wave surfers is what it's like to fall. What does that feel like when you take impact of like a, 25-foot wave overhead? Like, what is that experience like?
Yeah, well, I mean, every single wave is different. So I've had moments where I thought I was gonna have the worst beating of my life, and it wasn't too bad. And then I've had moments on maybe smaller days that you weren't really thinking too much about the what ifs and getting the worst pounding ever. So I mean, it differs swell to swell, and how much power is behind that storm that creates those waves, and also the luck of the draw of like what happened. Did you fall on a wave? Did you get caught inside? Whatever it may be. But yeah, I mean, any 50-foot wave coming at you, I can't even imagine how much weight that is in like cubic water impacting you at such speeds. It's extremely violent. I'm actually like sometimes I'm surprised that our bodies can handle that. It's just, like there's so much power behind that. And if you're caught in the wrong spot or hit just in the perfect place, it's, I can't, I mean, I haven't been in a car accident, but I would imagine it's somewhat like that. But then you're underwater and being thrashed around. Like I pulled my arms in after I dislocated my shoulder years ago, and you're just getting completely exploded. Like you can't even hold your own limbs in. So you kind of just have to like rely on all of your training that you've done and know that your body can withstand that. And when I'm underwater and getting really pounded, it's the deepest, darkest place that you can go, but it's all in your mind on like telling yourself what you can handle. So I'm telling myself like positive affirmations underwater, like you got this, you did all the training, you're fine, you're going to be coming up soon. Like I try to just tell myself all positive things. And yeah, it's not fun, that's for sure. It's like that's the daunting part of this sport, and why only such small numbers of people. I mean, there's probably, I don't know, 100 people in the world, a couple hundred people in the world that do this. And I mean, there's, I'd say 10 women in the world that are really good, that are at the top of the sport, and I don't know, 30, 40 guys that are at the top of the sport. And I mean, that's a pretty small number when you look around the world at how many surfers there are. But that's the reason why, like, getting held down or pounded by one of these waves is one of the scariest things that you can possibly go through. But it's turning that fear into fuel and using it to your advantage. Because when you push through fear, it's, there's magic there that is indescribable in surfing, but you can push through that and really like get yourself past your boundaries. There's something so magical about that. And those sessions that I push through my fear and get over those hurdles, I get the best waves of my life.
So surfing is one of those sports. I mean, it's so mental. I mean, being able to keep your composure when you're getting pounded and to not start hyperventilating or freaking out. I mean, that's like an essential part of, being able to handle it underwater. And I'm curious if you have any advice for not just surfing specific, but for overcoming, stepping out of your comfort zone. I mean, like, getting into bigger waves, or, I mean, I think it could be as simple as just running longer distances, but I think surfers are kind of experts in that world. So I was just curious if you have any advice there.
Yeah, I guess surfing, in the way that it's different is it's so unpredictable, because you're dealing with the ocean and no wave is ever the same. No conditions are ever the same. Skateboarding, you get to practice on the same ramp or the same pipe, and biking, yeah, maybe it rains the night before, you have a little bit, it's still the same road. I mean, the list can go on there with different sports, but the ocean is constantly changing and moving. So learning to adapt is the key. And, I progressed like really like slowly into big waves. And so I kind of always like go back on that of, doing all the right steps to get to your goal, and taking baby steps, not just going from like head high surf to jaws. And, you learn so much in between, of the way that the water moves, the way that you position yourself on a board, what your board does in different conditions. There's so many different variables that you skip if you don't go through all those steps to get there. I think like just as far as like getting out of your comfort zone, it's, that's where the best moments in life happen. And I think obviously doing them, with safety in mind and not just going full send on whatever you may be doing, but, kind of assessing the options. And if it's something that you think that you can do and you're just holding yourself back with that little bit of fear, it's like, just pushing through that boundary just a little bit. And once you get to the other side of it, like that is where life, that's where everything comes together and you're like, this is living. This is the best moment ever. And I have found myself in surfing, but in almost everything in life, like when I push through that, it's just like the sky is the limit in the sense of like you're really connected with the universe and with Mother Nature. And I just think that it's it's for each person to experience in their own way, but I just truly think that like the real exciting moments and memorable moments in my life have been by just pushing just a little bit more. Okay, let's try just a little bit more. And yeah, then the boundaries get pushed, right? And in sport, that's how things are, our world records are made and how people win world titles or games. It's like they believe in themselves just that little bit more to push the boundaries. And yeah, I encourage everybody to find something that makes them feel that way. Surfing is my thing, and but those feelings are magic.
Well, that's kind of a perfect, we're like right at that 45-minute mark, and that was like the perfect sentiment to end on. Like I kind of just want to like end on that one. So that's what they're left with. But is there anything else you want to say to anyone listening before we wrap this up?
I think you touched on a lot.
Yeah, we did. We covered a lot. It was super fun to talk to you. So thank you so much for coming on and making this happen.
Yeah, no worries. Sorry it took so long, Timmy. I'm actually caught up on my emails now, so I'm doing better. It's just been a crazy winter, and I appreciate the patience and keeping on me to get back in touch.
Yeah, no worries at all. Like I said earlier, I'm like happy that we delayed because now we got to talk about the Eddy and hear about that. So it was pretty cool.
Awesome.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Have a good one.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Adventurous Minds. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you want to stay up to date with the latest releases, you can scan the QR code or find us on Instagram at Adventurous Minds Pod. See you out there.